The question came on a Tuesday evening while I was stirring pasta sauce, the kitchen windows fogged with steam from the boiling pot. Zeph 7742, who insisted I call him just Zeph despite the clicking disapproval from his throat sacs, stood in the doorway with his forearms folded in that peculiar way that meant he was thinking deeply about something. Marcus, he said, his translator converting his natural harmonic frequencies into perfectly flat English, explain to me this concept your species calls love. I nearly dropped the wooden spoon. After 8 months of living together in this cramped apartment near the university district, Zeph had asked me about human customs, biology, even our strange habit of keeping plants indoors for no practical purpose. But, love? That seemed oddly personal, even for someone who had no concept of privacy in the human sense. Zeph belonged to the Kethvar, a species that had achieved interstellar travel roughly 3,000 years before humans figured out agriculture. They were tall, graceful beings with translucent skin that revealed the slow pulse of blue-green fluid beneath, and eyes like black pearls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Galactic Council had assigned him to Earth as part of a cultural exchange program, and, through a series of bureaucratic mishaps, he had ended up as my roommate rather than living in the designated alien quarters on campus. Love? I repeated, turning down the heat under the sauce. That's a pretty big question, Zeph. His head tilted in that bird-like way that indicated curiosity among his kind. I have been observing human behavior for these many cycles now. I witness humans engaging in behaviors that seem counterproductive to survival, resource acquisition, or logical advancement. Yet they describe these behaviors using this word love. I require clarification. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I suddenly realized how impossible it would be to explain love to a species that reproduced through scheduled genetic exchanges and raised their offspring in communal centers. The Kethvar were efficient, logical, and, from what I understood, largely emotionless in the way humans understood emotions. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the kitchen table. This might take a while. Zeph folded his long limbs with fluid grace into the chair that we had specially ordered to accommodate his physiology. His forearms arranged themselves symmetrically, and his large eyes focused on me with the intensity one had come to associate with his deepest concentration. Love is. I began, then stopped. How do you explain color to someone who has only ever seen in black and white? How do you describe music to someone who has never heard sound? Love is when you care about someone else's happiness more than your own. The translator hummed softly as it processed this, then delivered what I assumed was Zeph's response. This appears to be a survival disadvantage. Why would evolution permit such a trait to persist? Because it's not just about individuals, I said, settling into my own chair across from him. Love makes us stronger together. When humans love each other, we protect each other, we work together, we sacrifice for the group. It's actually a survival advantage disguised as madness. Zeph's skin shifted slightly, becoming more opaque, which I had learned indicated deep thought. You speak of different types of this love. Please elaborate. Over the next hour, as my pasta grew cold and forgotten, I tried to explain the various forms of love that humans experienced. Parental love, the fierce protective instinct that drove humans to impossible acts of courage for their children. Romantic love, the passionate connection between partners that could inspire poetry or start wars. Platonic love, the deep bonds of friendship that sustained us through life's challenges. I told him about love of country, love of ideas, love of art and music and literature. With each explanation, Zeph's questions grew more probing. He wanted to understand the biochemistry, the evolutionary advantages, the social structures that emerged from these emotional bonds. But I could see something else in his dark eyes, something that might have been longing, though I wasn't sure the Kethvar were capable of such feelings. Your species bonds through shared emotional experiences, he observed finally. This creates networks of loyalty and cooperation that extend beyond logical alliances. Exactly, I said. Love makes us irrational, but it also makes us capable of things that pure logic never could. Provide an example. I thought for a moment, then told him about my grandmother. How she had worked 3 jobs to put my father through college, never taking a day off, never complaining. How when she got sick, my father had quit his job and moved across the country to care for her, spending his life savings on treatments that might give her a few more months. How when she died, he had continued visiting her grave every week for 15 years, bringing flowers and telling her about his life. None of that makes logical sense, I said. But it makes perfect human sense. Zeph was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his harmonic frequencies were softer, requiring the translator to amplify them. In my culture, when an individual becomes non-productive due to age or illness, they are given the honor of dissolution. They are chemically induced into a peaceful death and their biological components are recycled for the benefit of the community. This is considered the highest form of service. And how do you feel about that? I asked, then immediately regretted the question. Feelings weren't something the Kethvar discussed. But Zeph surprised me. I find myself questioning this practice since observing human behavior. Your father's actions serve no logical purpose, yet you describe them with what I can only translate as reverence. There is something in this concept of love that seems to generate meaning beyond mere survival. That night, I lay awake thinking about our conversation. I had explained love to an alien, but, in doing so, I had started to see it through his eyes. The sheer audacity of human emotion, the way we built entire civilizations on the foundation of caring about each other. How we created art and music and poetry not because they served any practical purpose, but because they expressed the inexpressible feelings inside us. The next morning, I found Zeph in the living room, his tall frame silhouetted against the window as he watched the sunrise. This was unusual. The Kethvar didn't typically appreciate aesthetic experiences. The light patterns are pleasing, he said without turning around. Is this what humans call beauty? Part of it, I replied, joining him at the window. Beauty is what happens when something touches that emotional part of us. It's related to love, in a way. I am beginning to understand why the Galactic Council finds your species so unpredictable. His translator conveyed what might have been amusement. You make decisions based on these emotional responses rather than logical analysis. Not always, I said. But, yeah, sometimes. And, you know what? Sometimes those illogical decisions turn out to be the right ones. Over the following weeks, I noticed changes in Zeph's behavior. He began spending time in the small garden behind our apartment building, something he had previously dismissed as an inefficient use of space. He started asking me about human music, sitting quietly while I played songs and trying to understand why certain combinations of sounds could move us to tears or joy. He even began joining me for my evening walks, though he claimed it was purely for observational purposes. One evening, as we walked through the park near campus, Zeph stopped suddenly, beside a small memorial garden. It was a simple place, just a circle of benches surrounding a fountain, with plaques commemorating local residents who had died. Humans create monuments to the dead, he observed. This serves no practical function. It serves an emotional function, I said. We remember people because we loved them. The monuments help us feel connected to them even after they're gone. Zeph approached one of the plaques, his movements careful and deliberate. Sarah Chen, he read aloud. Beloved mother, teacher, friend. She touched many lives and will be remembered always. He looked up at me. This person has been dead for 7 years, according to the date. Yet humans still maintain this space for her memory. Love doesn't end with death, I explained. That's one of the things that makes it powerful. It creates connections that transcend individual existence. Your species invests significant resources in maintaining these emotional connections to non-functional individuals, Zeph said, but there was something different in his tone. Not the clinical detachment I was used to, but something softer. Because those individuals still matter to us, I said. Because love means that someone's value isn't determined by what they can produce or contribute. It means they matter simply because they exist, because we care about them. Zeph was quiet for the rest of our walk. When we returned to the apartment, he went directly to his room, which was unusual. Normally he would spend the evening asking me questions about whatever human behavior had puzzled him that day. I was reading in the living room when he emerged several hours later, carrying what looked like a small, crystalline device in one of his 4 hands. Marcus, he said, his tone more formal than usual. I wish to share something with you, but I must first explain that what I am about to show you violates several protocols of my species. I set down my book. Okay. The Kethvar do not form individual attachments, he continued. We are raised communally and educated to prioritize collective benefit over personal connections. We do not mourn the dead, because death is simply a transition from functional to non-functional status. He paused, the crystal device glowing softly in his palm. But, before I came to Earth, I had what you might call a friend. The word sounded strange coming from his translator, as if the machine had to search for an appropriate term. Her designation was Nith 3891, but I called her Nith. We were part of the same educational cohort and later worked together in the xenobiology division. She was curious about other species in ways that were considered unusual among our kind. She asked questions that others deemed irrelevant. Zeph activated the device, and, suddenly, the room filled with a holographic projection. It showed two Kethvar standing in what appeared to be a laboratory, their heads close together as they examined some kind of specimen. One of them, I realized, was a younger version of Zeph. The other must have been Nith. She died in an exploration accident 3 years ago, Zeph continued, his harmonic frequencies dropping to barely audible levels. According to our customs, I should have simply accepted this and continued with my duties. Instead, I found myself unable to concentrate. I kept expecting to see her in the laboratory. I saved her research notes, even though they had no practical value. When I was selected for this cultural exchange, I brought this memory crystal with me, though possessing personal mementos is discouraged among my people. I watched the holographic figures, seeing something in their body language that suggested a connection deeper than mere professional cooperation. You loved her, I said quietly. I did not understand what that meant until you explained it to me, Zeph replied. But, yes. I believe I loved her, in the way that my species is capable of love. And, now I find myself wondering what our civilization might be like if we acknowledged these feelings instead of suppressing them. The hologram faded, but Zeph continued to hold the crystal device. Your explanation of love has given me a framework for understanding my own experiences. But, it has also created difficulty. I can no longer view my people's customs with the same acceptance I once had. I realized that I had inadvertently done something profound and, possibly terrible. In explaining human love to Zeph, I had awakened something in him that his species had deliberately evolved away from. I had made him feel alone in a way that the Kethvar were never supposed to experience. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean to. Do not apologize, Zeph interrupted. You have given me something valuable, even if it is also painful. You have shown me that my feelings for Nith were not aberrations to be corrected, but connections to be treasured. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two very different beings sharing the universal experience of loss and memory. Finally, Zeph spoke again. There is something else I must tell you, Marcus. My assignment on Earth is scheduled to end in 6 weeks. I am to return to the Kethvar homeworld and resume my previous duties. The news hit me harder than I expected. Over the months we had lived together, I had grown genuinely fond of my alien roommate. His curiosity about humanity had helped me see my own species with fresh eyes, and his unique perspective had enriched my understanding of the universe. Will you tell them? I asked. About what you've learned about love? Zeph's skin shifted to a deeper opacity, a sign of uncertainty among his kind. I do not know. Such revelations could be considered evidence of contamination by alien influences. But, I also cannot pretend that this knowledge does not exist within me now. As the weeks passed, I watched Seth struggle with his newfound understanding of love and loss. He began to exhibit behaviors that were clearly emotional, though he still insisted on describing them in clinical terms. He became protective of the small garden where we spent time together. He grew agitated when discussing his return to the Kethvar homeworld. Most tellingly, he began to speak of our friendship using possessive language, referring to our conversations and our walks rather than simply conversations and walks. On his final night on Earth, we sat together in the garden, watching the stars emerge as darkness fell. Zeph had been unusually quiet all day, his skin fluctuating between various levels of opacity in a pattern I had never seen before. Marcus, he said finally, I want you to know that my time here has been significant. Learning about human love has changed me in ways that I cannot fully articulate. But I believe it has changed me for the better. Even though it's made things more complicated for you? Yes, he said without hesitation. Because complication implies depth, and depth implies meaning. I would rather live with the difficulty of feeling than return to the simplicity of not feeling. He reached into a pouch at his side and withdrew something I had never seen before, a small crystal, similar to the memory device he had shown me weeks earlier, but this one was different somehow, more complex in its internal structure. I have created a new memory crystal, he said, offering it to me. It contains records of our conversations, our shared experiences, and my observations about human love. I want you to have it. I took the crystal, feeling its surprising warmth against my palm. Why? Because love, as you taught me, creates connections that transcend individual existence. If I cannot openly share what I have learned with my own people, then, perhaps someday, another of my kind will come to Earth and seek to understand what I have understood. This crystal will be a bridge between worlds, a record of what can happen when two different species choose to care about each other. The next morning, I drove Zeph to the spaceport where the Kethvar transport ship waited. The vessel was beautiful in its alien geometry, all flowing curves and surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. Other members of Zeph's species moved about with their characteristic efficiency, preparing for departure. As we said our goodbyes, Zeph did something unprecedented. He reached out with one of his forearms and gently touched my shoulder, a gesture of contact that the Kethvar typically avoided. "Thank you, my friend," he said, and I could hear something in his harmonic frequencies that the translator couldn't quite capture. "You have taught me that love is not a weakness, but a form of strength that your species has mastered in ways that others can only dream of achieving. And you've taught me that understanding can bridge any gap," I replied. "Even between species separated by millions of years of evolution." As I watched the transport ship rise into the sky and disappear among the stars, I realized that Zeph had been wrong about one thing. Love hadn't made our connection complicated at all. It had made it exactly what it needed to be: real, meaningful, and strong enough to span the distances between worlds. The crystal he had given me sat on my desk for weeks, its surface catching and refracting light in patterns that seemed almost alive. Sometimes I would hold it and think about my alien friend, wondering if he had found a way to reconcile his new understanding of love with the expectations of his species. I hoped that somehow, the connection we had forged would help him navigate the difficult path. Little did I know that our story was far from over, and that the seeds of change we had planted would grow in ways neither of us could have imagined. 3 months after Zeph's departure, I received an unexpected message through the Galactic Communication Network. The holographic display showed the familiar symbol of the Kethvar Diplomatic Corps, but the content was anything but official. "Marcus," Zeph's translated voice filled my apartment. "I hope this message finds you well. I am contacting you because I require your assistance with a matter of great importance. Can you meet me at the neutral station Kepler 442? I will explain everything when you arrive." The message was brief, but I could detect something in the harmonic frequencies that suggested urgency, even anxiety. Zeph had never contacted me since returning to his homeworld, and for him to reach out now, asking me to travel to a neutral station rather than the Kethvar homeworld, suggested that something significant had happened. It took me 2 weeks to arrange passage to Kepler 442, a commercial station that served as a meeting point for various species engaged in trade and diplomacy. The journey gave me plenty of time to wonder what could possibly require my presence. The Kethvar were technologically advanced far beyond humanity. What could I possibly offer that they couldn't provide for themselves? When I finally docked at the station, I was surprised to find Zeph waiting for me at the airlock. But this wasn't the composed, clinical being I remembered. His skin showed rapid fluctuations of opacity, and his movements lacked their usual fluid grace. Most concerning, his forearms moved in asymmetrical patterns, something I had never seen among the Kethvar. "Zeph," I said, stepping off the transport. "You look different." "I am different," he replied, his translator working harder than usual to convert his agitated harmonic frequencies. "The knowledge you shared with me about human love has had consequences I did not anticipate." He led me through the station's corridors, past vendors selling goods from dozens of different worlds and species mingling in the careful neutrality of neutral space. We eventually reached a small observation deck overlooking the station's central docking bay, where ships from across the galaxy came and went like mechanical birds. After I returned to my homeworld, Zeph began, I attempted to resume my previous duties in the xenobiology department. But I found that I could no longer view other species through the lens of pure scientific objectivity. Every culture I studied, every social structure I analyzed, I found myself searching for expressions of what you had taught me to recognize as love. He paused, watching an elegant seraphim vessel dock with barely a whisper of expelled gases. I began to see patterns that had been invisible to me before. The Mantari warriors who formed fighting pairs that lasted their entire lives. The crystalline Vithians who maintained harmonic resonance across vast distances. The aquatic deep dwellers who died if permanently separated from their podmates. All of these behaviors that we had classified as simple survival mechanisms suddenly revealed themselves to be expressions of emotional bonds. You started recognizing love in other species, I said, beginning to understand. And that changed how you saw your own people. Exactly, Zeph confirmed. But more than that, I began to see what we had lost. The Kethvar had not always been as we are now. In our ancient records, I found references to bonding rituals, to individual partnerships, to what could only be described as familial connections. At some point in our history, we had deliberately evolved away from these emotional attachments in favor of collective efficiency. And you started questioning that evolution. Zeph's skin shifted to a deep opacity that I now recognized as his expression of intense emotion. I did more than question it, Marcus. I began to challenge it openly. I presented my findings to the Council of Biological Sciences, arguing that our species had sacrificed something essential in our pursuit of logical perfection. The implications of this hit me immediately. Among the Kethvar, challenging fundamental aspects of their society wasn't just controversial, it was essentially unthinkable. What happened? I was declared contaminated by alien influences, Zeph said simply. I was scheduled for psychological reconditioning to remove what they termed my aberrant emotional responses. In 3 days, I would have undergone procedures that would have restored me to proper Kethvar thinking patterns. Would have? For the first time since I had known him, Zeph made a sound that needed no translation, laughter. It was unlike any laugh I had ever heard, a complex harmonic pattern that seemed to contain notes of joy, defiance, and something that might have been hope. I escaped, he said. With help. Before I could ask what he meant, I heard footsteps behind us. I turned to see another Kethvar approaching, but this one was different from any I had encountered before. Where most of Zeph's people moved with careful precision, this individual seemed to flow with an almost dance-like grace. Their skin showed constant subtle shifts of transparency, and their forearms moved in synchronized patterns that suggested artistic training rather than scientific discipline. Marcus, Zeph said, I would like you to meet Lythe 9156. Or as she prefers to be called, simply Lythe. Lythe stepped forward and did something that shocked me. She reached out and gently touched my hand with one of her arms, a deliberate gesture of contact that I knew was unprecedented among the Kethvar. I have heard much about you, Marcus Chen, she said, her translator rendering her harmonic frequencies in a voice that seemed warmer somehow than Zeph's. Zeph has told me about the human concept of love, and how it changed his understanding of existence itself. Lythe was part of a small group of Kethvar who had been experiencing what we now recognize as emotional responses, Zeph explained. When I began presenting my research, several individuals approached me privately. They had been hiding their feelings, believing themselves to be defective. But we were not defective, Lythe added. We were simply remembering what our species had forgotten. When Zeph shared his knowledge of human love, it gave us a framework for understanding our own experiences. I looked between them, seeing something in their body language that I was beginning to recognize. You two are partners, Zeph said, and, for the first time I heard pride in his translated voice. We have formed what you would call a romantic bond. It is the first such pairing among the Kethvar in over 1,000 years. The magnitude of what they were telling me was staggering. An entire species rediscovering emotions that had been bred out of them generations ago, all triggered by my simple explanation of human love to a curious alien roommate. There are others, Lythe continued. 17 individuals so far who have acknowledged experiencing emotional attachments. We have formed what you might call a family unit, though we have no Kethvar word for such a concept. And the authorities? I asked. They consider us a contamination that must be contained, Zeph said. We cannot return to Kethvar space. If we are captured, we will be subjected to neural reconditioning that will eliminate our capacity for emotional response permanently. So what will you do? Lyth and Zeph exchanged a look, and I saw something pass between them that needed no translation. It was the same expression I had seen between human couples, a moment of silent communication that spoke of deep connection and shared purpose. We want to establish a colony, Zeph said. A place where Kethvar can explore emotional connections without persecution. But we lack the resources and knowledge to create a viable settlement. That's why I contacted you, he continued. Humans have extensive experience in creating communities based on emotional bonds. Your entire civilization is built on the foundation of love in its various forms. We need guidance on how to structure a society that acknowledges both logical thinking and emotional connection. I spent the next several hours talking with Zeph, Lyth, and other members of their group as they arrived at the station. Each had their own story of discovering emotions that they had been taught were impossible for their species. Some had formed romantic partnerships, others had developed deep friendships, and a few had even begun to grieve for deceased colleagues in ways that went far beyond the clinical acceptance their culture prescribed. What struck me most was how hungry they were for knowledge about human emotional experiences. They wanted to understand not just love, but the entire spectrum of feelings that humans took for granted. Joy, sorrow, anger, compassion, hope, fear, all of these were concepts they were encountering for the first time in their adult lives. Your species treats emotions as essential components of intelligence, observed Death 7788, a former engineer who had discovered his capacity for friendship while working on a long-term project with a colleague. You have integrated feeling and thinking in ways that enhance both capabilities. It's not always easy, I admitted. Emotions can sometimes lead us to make poor decisions. But they also inspire us to achieve things that pure logic never could. Give us an example, Lyth requested. I thought about the greatest human achievements I could think of and realized that almost all of them had been motivated by love in some form. The moon landing, I said finally. We spent enormous resources and took incredible risks to put humans on the moon, not because it was the most logical thing to do, but because we dreamed of touching the stars. That dream was born from love, love of exploration, love of knowledge, love of pushing beyond our limitations. And now your species explores the galaxy, Zeph added. While my people, for all our technological superiority, have remained largely within our own solar system because we lost the emotional drive to seek new experiences. Over the following days, I helped the group of emotional Kethvar plan their colony. They had identified a planet in unclaimed space that could support their physiology, but they needed to understand how to create social structures that would allow for both individual emotional expression and collective decision-making. I shared with them the history of human communities, from the earliest family groups to modern democratic societies. I explained how we had learned to balance individual desires with group needs, how we had developed laws and customs that protected both personal freedom and social stability. But, perhaps most importantly, I helped them understand that the journey they were embarking on wouldn't be easy. Learning to live with emotions after a lifetime of suppression would be challenging, and creating a new society from scratch would test their bonds in ways they couldn't anticipate. Love isn't just about the good feelings, I told them during one of our planning sessions. It also means dealing with jealousy, disappointment, grief, and conflict. Are you prepared for that? We have already begun to experience some of these difficulties, Lyth admitted. 2 of our number formed a partnership, then ended it when they discovered their emotional connection was not as strong as they had believed. The resulting conflict required intervention from the rest of us. And how did you handle it? We talked, Zeph said simply. We discussed the feelings involved, we considered the impact on our group, and we worked together to find a resolution that honored everyone's emotional needs while maintaining group cohesion. You mediated a breakup, I said, realizing what they had accomplished. You created a social mechanism for dealing with romantic conflict. That's incredibly sophisticated for a species that's only been feeling emotions for a few months. The more I worked with them, the more I realized that the Kethvar weren't just rediscovering love, they were evolving a new form of emotional intelligence. Their logical capabilities remained intact, but now they were being enhanced by emotional awareness rather than constrained by emotional suppression. When the time came for them to depart for their new world, I found myself experiencing something I hadn't expected, a profound sense of pride. These beings had risked everything to explore the full spectrum of consciousness, and, in doing so, they were becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. "You have given us more than knowledge," Zeph told me as we prepared to say goodbye. "You have given us the courage to become who we were meant to be." "And, you've shown me something I never realized," I replied. "Love isn't just a human trait. It's a universal potential that emerges when intelligence becomes sophisticated enough to value connection over mere survival." As I watched their ship depart for the distant world they would transform into a new kind of civilization, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple question about human love. What had started as an alien roommate's curiosity had become a catalyst for the evolution of an entire species. But, even more than that, it had revealed something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Love wasn't a weakness or an evolutionary accident, it was the next step in the development of truly advanced intelligence. And, now, for the first time in galactic history, that step was being taken by beings from two very different worlds, working together to create something neither could have achieved alone. The colony ship disappeared among the stars, carrying with it the seeds of a revolution that would eventually change the galaxy forever. But, at the time, I had no idea that the greatest challenges, and the most remarkable discoveries, were still to come. 5 years had passed since Zeph and his companions left to establish their emotional colony, and I had largely returned to my normal life on Earth. I completed my xenobiology degree and took a position with the Galactic Cultural Exchange Program, helping to facilitate understanding between human and alien civilizations. It was rewarding work, but I often found myself thinking about my former roommate and wondering how his unprecedented experiment in Kethvar emotional development was progressing. The answer came in the form of an urgent message from the Galactic Council itself. The holographic seal materialized in my office on a Tuesday morning, its formal blue glow indicating a communication of the highest importance. "Dr. Marcus Chen," the synthesized voice announced, "you are hereby summoned to appear before the Galactic Council emergency session regarding the situation designated as the Kethvar anomaly. Your presence is required immediately." I stared at the message in shock. The Galactic Council rarely involved humans in their proceedings, and an emergency session suggested that something had gone seriously wrong. My first thought was that Zeph's colony had failed, perhaps catastrophically. My second thought was worse, that the Kethvar government had found and destroyed them. The journey to the council station took 3 days, during which I received no additional information about why I was needed. When I finally arrived at the massive orbital complex that served as the galaxy's political center, I was immediately escorted to a waiting area outside the main council chambers. The being who came to collect me was a tall, crystalline Vithian whose harmonic resonance patterns indicated extreme agitation. "Dr. Chen," they chimed, "I am Council Mediator Tharn Prime. Thank you for coming so quickly. What's happened?" I asked as we walked through corridors lined with representatives from dozens of species. "Is it Zeph's colony? Are they in danger?" Tharn Prime's crystalline structure shifted to a deeper blue, which I knew indicated surprise among the Vithians. "You believe this to be about danger to the colony? Isn't it?" "Dr. Chen," Tharn Prime said, stopping outside the massive doors to the main chamber, "the situation is far more complex than that. The Kethvar colony you helped establish has not only survived, it has thrived beyond all projections. And that success has created complications." Before I could ask what they meant, the doors opened and I found myself standing before the full Galactic Council. Representatives from 47 different species sat in a vast amphitheater, their attention focused on me with an intensity that made my knees weak. At the center of the chamber stood 3 figures I recognized, Zeph, Lyth, and a third Kethvar I didn't know. But these weren't the same beings I had known 5 years ago. Their skin showed complex patterns of transparency and color that I had never seen among their species. Their movements were more fluid, more expressive. Most remarkably, they stood close together in a way that suggested deep emotional bonds, their forearms occasionally touching in gestures of affection and support. "Marcus!" Zeph called out, his harmonic frequencies conveying joy and relief. I am so glad you are here. We need your help to explain what we have become. Council Speaker Vorth 9, a massive cephalopod-like being from the Deep World Collective, activated the chamber's translation systems. Dr. Chen, their tentacles writhed as they spoke. 5 years ago, you provided information about human emotional bonds to this individual. That information has led to the creation of what may be the most significant development in galactic civilization in over 10,000 years. I don't understand, I said, looking between the council and the three Kethvar. Allow us to explain, said the third Kethvar, stepping forward. I am Kes 2234, though I prefer the name Kes. I am what you might call the elected leader of our colony, though our society operates very differently from traditional Kethvar hierarchy. Elected? I repeated. The Kethvar don't hold elections. The original Kethvar do not, Kes agreed. But, we are no longer original Kethvar. We have become something new, something that incorporates both our species' logical capabilities and the emotional intelligence we learn from studying human connections. Show him the data, Speaker Vorth 9 commanded, and the chamber's holographic systems activated. Suddenly, I was surrounded by three-dimensional charts and graphs showing the development of the Kethvar colony over the past 5 years. The statistics were staggering. Population growth, technological advancement, artistic creation, scientific discovery, social stability, every measurable metric showed progress far beyond what should have been possible for a settlement of only a few hundred individuals. In 5 years, Life explained, our colony has made technological advances that took the original Kethvar centuries to achieve. We have developed new forms of art that combine logical structure with emotional expression. We have created social systems that maximize both individual fulfillment and collective benefit. But, how? I asked, studying the data that seemed almost impossible. Love, Zeph said simply. The concept you taught me has become the foundation of our entire civilization. But, not just romantic love, we have developed sophisticated understanding of all forms of emotional connection. Friendship, familial bonds, community attachment, even love for abstract concepts like beauty and knowledge. Kes activated another display, showing architectural plans for structures unlike anything I had ever seen. Our buildings are designed not just for function, but for emotional impact. Our work schedules account for the psychological needs of our people. Our decision-making processes consider both logical outcomes and emotional consequences. And it works? I asked, still trying to process what they were telling me. It works better than anything we dared hope, Life confirmed. Individuals who feel emotionally supported are more creative, more productive, more willing to take risks that lead to innovation. Our scientists make breakthrough discoveries because they are passionate about their research, not just efficient at it. Speaker Vorth 9 gestured for attention. Dr. Chen, the reason you have been brought before this council is that word of the colony's success has spread throughout the galaxy. Multiple species are now requesting information about human emotional development, hoping to incorporate similar principles into their own societies. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You're saying that other species want to learn about love? 23 different civilizations have formally requested cultural exchange programs focused on human emotional intelligence, Council Mediator Tharn Prime confirmed. The Mantari hegemony wants to understand how emotional bonds can strengthen their warrior partnerships. The Crystalline Confederation seeks to explore how feelings might enhance their harmonic networks. Even the logic-based computational collective has expressed interest in integrating emotional subroutines into their decision matrices. But, I struggled to find words. That's potentially revolutionary for the entire galaxy. Exactly, Speaker Vorth 9 agreed. Which is why we need your guidance. You are the human who first explained these concepts to the Kethvar. You helped establish the colony that has proven emotional intelligence can coexist with logical advancement. We need you to help us develop protocols for sharing this knowledge safely across species barriers. Over the next several hours, I learned about the full scope of what Zeph's colony had achieved. They had created the galaxy's first truly integrated emotional-logical civilization. Their artists produced works that moved other species to tears, even when the viewers couldn't fully understand the cultural context. Their scientists approached problems with a combination of rigorous analysis and intuitive leaps that led to solutions no purely logical species had conceived. But, perhaps most remarkably, they had solved problems that had plagued other species for millennia. Conflicts that would have led to war among traditional civilizations were resolved through emotional mediation techniques they had developed. Resource allocation decisions that would have created inequality elsewhere resulted in systems that maximized both efficiency and individual satisfaction. We have become living proof, Zeph told me during a private moment between sessions, that emotional intelligence and logical thinking are not opposites, but partners. When they work together, they create capabilities that neither can achieve alone. Like humans have been doing for thousands of years, I realized. Exactly. Your species has been demonstrating the potential of integrated emotional-logical intelligence since you first began forming complex societies. But, you were the only ones doing it, so the rest of us dismissed it as a quirk of human evolution rather than recognizing it as an advanced form of consciousness. The council sessions continued for 3 days, during which I found myself at the center of discussions about the future of galactic civilization. Representatives from dozens of species wanted to understand how emotional development could be safely introduced to their societies. Some were concerned about the potential for emotional manipulation or instability. Others worried that feelings would interfere with their established social systems. The key, I told them, is understanding that emotions aren't the opposite of intelligence, they're a form of intelligence. Humans don't make decisions based on feelings instead of logic, we use feelings to inform our logic. I shared examples of how emotional intelligence had driven human achievement. The compassion that led us to develop medicine. The curiosity that drove us to explore space. The love that motivated us to create art, music, and literature. The righteous anger that pushed us to fight injustice and create better societies. Emotions aren't chaos, I explained. They're information. They tell us what matters, what's worth preserving, what's worth changing. A civilization that ignores emotional data is like a scientist who ignores half their experimental results. But, the most convincing argument came from the Kethvar themselves. Zeph, Lyth, and Kes presented detailed analyses of their society's achievements, showing how emotional considerations had led to innovations that pure logic never could have produced. When we design a building, Kes explained, we consider not just its structural requirements and functional efficiency, but how it will make people feel when they enter it. This led us to discover architectural principles that actually improve cognitive function and emotional well-being. When we resolve conflicts, Lyth added, we address not just the logical disagreements, but the emotional needs of all parties. This has resulted in solutions that are more stable and satisfying than purely rational compromises. When we conduct scientific research, Zeph concluded, we allow our passion for discovery to guide our investigation while maintaining rigorous analytical standards. This combination has led to breakthrough insights that escaped purely logical approaches. By the end of the sessions, the Council had voted to establish the Integrated Intelligence Initiative, a galaxy-wide program to study and carefully implement emotional development among interested species. I was appointed as the primary human consultant, working alongside the Kethvar colony as a model for successful emotional-logical integration. The work wasn't easy. Each species had to find their own path to emotional development, based on their unique psychology and social structures. Some, like the plant-like Vertians, discovered that they had been experiencing collective emotions through their root networks without recognizing them as such. Others, like the energy-based Luminari, had to learn entirely new ways of conceptualizing individual emotional experience. But, gradually, across the galaxy, something unprecedented began to happen. Species that had been locked into purely logical thinking patterns began to explore the realm of feelings. Civilizations that had stagnated for centuries suddenly experienced bursts of creativity and innovation. Conflicts that had seemed intractable found resolution through emotional mediation techniques. 10 years after that first council session, I stood once again in the gardens of Zeph's colony, now a thriving city of over 10,000 beings from multiple species who had come to learn about integrated intelligence. Children played together, actual children, because the emotional Kethvar had rediscovered the joy of raising their own offspring rather than relegating reproduction to communal centers. Do you ever regret it? I asked Zeph as we watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that traditional Kethvar would never have bothered to appreciate. Giving up the simplicity of pure logic for the complexity of emotions? Zeph was quiet for a moment, his skin showing the slow, peaceful patterns I had learned indicated deep contentment. Marcus, he said finally, when I first asked you about human love, I thought I was seeking information about an alien curiosity. I had no idea that I was asking about the next stage of consciousness itself. And, now I understand that love isn't what makes humans unusual. Love is what makes any species truly intelligent. Logic can solve problems and create tools, but love gives meaning to the solutions and purpose to the tools. Without love, intelligence is just sophisticated calculation. With love, intelligence becomes wisdom. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, I thought about the incredible journey that had begun with a simple question from a curious alien roommate. That question had led to the transformation of an entire species, the reshaping of galactic civilization, and the discovery of fundamental truths about the nature of consciousness itself. But, perhaps most remarkably, it had proven something that humans had always known but never been able to demonstrate, that love, in all its forms, wasn't a weakness to be overcome or a distraction to be managed. It was the highest expression of intelligence, the force that transformed mere survival into meaning, mere existence into purpose. The galaxy would never be the same. And, thanks to one alien's curiosity about human emotions, it would be infinitely better. Years later, when young beings from dozens of species came to study at what had become known as the Integration Academy, they would often ask me about the origins of their emotional education. I would tell them about Zeph's question, about our late-night conversations in a small apartment on Earth, about the courage it took for him to challenge his entire species' worldview. But, mostly, I would tell them about the power of connection itself. How two very different beings, through the simple act of caring about each other's understanding, had managed to bridge not just the gap between species, but the gap between logic and emotion, between individual achievement and collective growth, between mere intelligence and true wisdom. Love, as it turned out, really was the answer. Not just to Zeph's question, but to questions that species across the galaxy had been asking for millennia without even realizing it. And now, thanks to one alien roommate's curiosity and one human's willingness to share his heart across the stars, the entire galaxy was learning to love. It was, I reflected, exactly the kind of impossible, illogical, utterly human thing that pure logic could never have predicted, and exactly the kind of miracle that love made possible every single day.